everyone, Professor Davis here. So we're going to look at microbial mechanisms and pathogenicity in this particular video. All right, so the top part of this particular chart should look familiar. This came from the lecture before where we talked about the reservoir, the transmission, and the susceptibility of the host. We're going to start down this part with the susceptibility of the host, and we're going to look at portal of entry. We're going to look at how it gets inside. What are factors that make the bacteria or virus or whatever virulent? How does it damage our cells? And then how do we prevent and treat those things? So we're going to be taking it down the side and across the bottom. All right, so because of this, we do need to look at some terms first. The first thing we have is the pathogenicity. Pathogenicity means it's the ability to cause disease by overcoming the host's defenses. So it has the ability to overcome your defenses and it makes you sick. Virulence is the degree of this. It's the degree of the pathogenicity. It is what does the bacteria, the virus, the protist, the worm, what does it have that makes it successful? How does it overcome your host defense? Okay, so we're going to take a look at those. But the first thing we got to look at is how these bacteria, viruses, or other microbes gain access. How do they do the portal of entry and get inside of you? Well, they can get inside of you a number of ways. The first is mucous membranes. We then are going to look at skin and what we call the parenteral routes. So the first ones here are your mucous membranes. You have several of these that make you susceptible. The first is your respiratory tract. Your respiratory tract is going to be your nose, your mouth, and down into your lungs. Microbes here get inhaled. You breathe them in, and you breathe them in either through droplets or dust particles. Now here you see in this box some of the infections that are caused due to you breathing them in. These are things like certain types of pneumonia, tuberculosis, pertussis, which is whooping cough, the flu, influenza, measles, German measles, mono, chickenpox, histoplasmosis. The list can go on, but these are some examples of when you breathe in the culprit. The next mucous membrane is going to be the gastrointestinal tract. So this is how microbes get access in contaminated food, water, from your hands, or from other fomites. And this is normally due to what we call the fecal oral route, where we didn't wash our hands properly after going to the bathroom, and then we ate something or we put something in our mouth, which ultimately is where the transmission happens. Okay, so this is the digestive system, the gastrointestinal tract. And some examples here are dysentery, brucellosis, cholera, salmonella, typhoid fever, hepatitis A, mumps, and trichinosis. And again, this isn't the whole list, but these are some. The last mucous membrane that we see here is the what we call the genitourinary tract. So this is the genital area as well as the urinary. Now in females, these are separate. You have a genital area and you have a urinary. But in males, they're connected, okay? Because we see that the urinary and the reproductive system are connected here. So these are going to be where microbes are normally transmitted through sexual contact, direct contact. And these are things like gonorrhea, syphilis, urethritis, which means that it's inflammation of the urethra, herpes viruses, AIDS, and even candidiasis, which is a yeast infection. So these are just some of the examples. The next area that they can gain access is through the skin. When we look at the skin, we see that the skin could be broken. It could be transmitted through like an insect bite. We also see that the conjunctiva could get infected. This is the part of your eye. It lines the eyelids and surface of your eyeball. And so it could get infected. When we get inflammation of that, we call it conjunctivitis. Okay, so those are some areas on the skin. And then we have what we call the parenteral route. This is where microbes are deposited under the skin, either through punctures, bites, cuts, wounds, or like surgeries. So some examples that can get under your skin are gas gangrene, tetanus, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, hepatitis B, rabies, and malaria. Again, this isn't a full list, but it gives you an idea. So this brings us to some concepts we need to make sure we understand. For one, most pathogens have a preferred portal of entry. They may not be able to cause disease unless they get in through that preferred portal. So if they prefer respiratory, they have to gain access to the respiratory to make you sick. If they prefer the digestive, they have to get through your digestive system in order to make you sick. Some pathogens can use several portals, and they are effective no matter how. Getting under your skin, breathing it in, eating it, whatever. Virulence varies per organism. The organism, you must get enough exposure from it for it to gain a foothold and overcome your defenses. That's what results in actual disease. And then also, almost all pathogens have some means of adherence or attachment. They have some way to be able to attach to you in order to gain access. Now, this means they could attach to the host cells themselves through those little receptors or ligands. We do see that we have biofilms that can help with attachments, little fimbriae, which are the hair-like extensions, but these are going to be lots of different ways that they might be able to adhere. So once they gain entry, the second thing they have to be able to do is penetration. So penetration means that they have to be able to invade. So invasiveness is the ability of the organism to penetrate to your deeper tissues. The deeper they can get, the worse they make you sick. So contributors to invasiveness, how can they get in and actually invade your body? Well, they might have a capsule. Capsules prevent phagocytosis, which is cell eating. This prevents your immune system from eating or consuming the invader. They may also have some cell wall components that are helpful. Some examples, they may have an M protein. This M protein on their cell wall allows them to have surface proteins that can attach. These are associated with strep pyrogens, and it actually promotes attachment and helps resist being eaten, phagocytosis. Fimbriae is another one, which is going to help anchor or hold on to a surface. And then we also have the myclonic acid. Myclonic acid, remember, has a very high lipid content, and this helps the mycobacteria resist digestion by your phagocytes. So again, they can't eat them and destroy them. Okay, so this is one way. The next way that they can have some invasiveness and what we would even consider some virulence factors are going to be production of exoenzymes. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We talked about enzymes way back in the chemistry chapter, like a couple of videos ago. And enzymes are going to speed up reactions in their proteins that help do a job. Exoenzymes are ones that the cells release in order to help them penetrate deeper. Okay, these are going to help the organisms penetrate to the deeper tissue. Kinases is if a clot forms, they actually can dissolve it, get rid of it. An example of this is fibrolysin, streptokinase, and staphylokinase. And guys, believe it or not, we actually use this for treatments. When individuals are having strokes and they're due to a blockage, a blood clot, we can actually administer streptokinase to break the clot up. So we exploit their ability to do this to help us in other medical issues. But this can be a problem for us if it's the invader that releases it. The next one is hyaluronidase. Hyaluronidase breaks down binder proteins, specifically in what we call hyaluronic acid, that is found in our different tissues. So this is used to help spread throughout the body, and it's going to break down the tissue so spreading is easier, so that's not as connected. The next one is collagenase. This one's going to break down the structural protein of collagen in your connective tissue. When we look at this one, the collagen helps bind your tissues, and again, it's breaking down a very vital protein. The last one on the list is the IgA proteases. And guys, IgA is a type of antibody, and so this enzyme breaks down that antibody. So these are just some of the examples of the exoenzymes, the ones they can release outside of their cells that can help them penetrate deeper. The next ones are what we call the antigenic variations. These are mutations When we look at mutations here, this is going to alter the surface antigens that allow the organisms from being recognized by your adaptive immunity. So your adaptive immunity changes based on what you're exposed to, and it creates memory cells. However, if these guys can change what they look like, they can avoid your immune system, because your immune system then says, oh, that doesn't belong, but I've never seen it before, and then it has to make a response. This takes time, and the bacteria is going to be able to potentially get away. All right, and this is where they can actually change their coat, and a great example of this is going to be the trypanosomes that are the cause of African sleeping sickness. The next one is invasion. This one is going to be a surface protein. It causes a disruption in the cytoskeleton of your plasma membrane of the host cells, which causes the membrane to ruffle. And you can see it here where it ruffles the membrane so that it can gain access. So these are just some of the examples. So we want to talk about mechanisms that damage the host cell. So these are things that ultimately, after they penetrate into your cells, they're going to ultimately hurt you. The first one is they can deplete your nutrients. They can do this by capturing or holding on to a nutrient that your cells need. An example of this is the cytophores. These guys can actually hold and bind iron, and that iron can't be used by your cells, which can create a problem. Another one is just direct damage to the cells. It's like the cells are bombarded, they're hit, and they take damage. Another one is actually toxin production, where they produce a toxin, and that toxin is what then does the damage. So a quick note here is most damage is not done by the bacteria itself, but it's done by the toxin. So the bacteria is not actually what's hurting you, it's the toxin they release. So let's talk about the two types of toxins, or big groups of toxins. The first one, when we look at this, the pathogenicity, this one is the ability to produce a toxin, and they can produce either exotoxins or endotoxins. So we're going to talk about exotoxins first. Exotoxins are going to be a toxin or protein that's produced by typically gram-positive organisms, and they release it out of their cells. Okay, so it's exotoxin. They're going to release it out. This is going to be where the disease is caused by an intoxication, not an infection. So the disease is caused by the toxin, not the infection. This stimulates a production of antibodies, which we call antitoxins. And a great example of those who make exotoxins are diphtheria and tetanus. They actually can be controlled by what we call a toxoid vaccine, which is going to be a toxin inactivated either by heat or chemical, and it helps your body fight the actual active toxin. So these are known as exotoxins because they send them out. Now, a lot of times toxins are grouped based on their action, like what do they affect. So if they're neurotoxins, they're going to attack your nervous system. This is things like botulism. Botulism actually makes your muscles not contract, so it makes them paralyzed. Botulism, guys, we use that to make Botox, okay, where they inject it, they inject some of the toxin, and now the muscles cannot contract. On the other hand, tetanus is also a neurotoxin, but it causes your muscles to contract tightly. They can contract so tightly that the bones can break, so that's a big deal. Another type of toxin group is the cytotoxins. These guys damage or kill your host cells. Diphtheria is one of the best examples here, and they can affect the nerve, heart, and kidney cells. Enterotoxins are going to act on your digestive system, your GI tract. These guys cause vomiting and diarrhea. And some good examples of enterotoxins are going to cause cholera, traveler's diarrhea, which is due to E. coli, and food poisoning, which is normally due to staph. We also have some membrane disturbing toxins. These are going to be what we call leukocidins. These are going to kill the phagocytic leukocytes, your white blood cells, and also your tissue macrophages. So these are going to damage cells that are important in your immune system. The hemolysins is another one, and they destroy your erythrocytes, which are your red blood cells. They can also destroy some of your leukocytes as well. And this is the streptolysin is an example of this. So I do have a chart here that shows you diseases caused by exotoxins, and it also tells you what kind of toxin it is. So botulism and tetanus are both neurotoxins. Diphtheria is a cytotoxin. You also see that you have cholera and traveler's diarrhea, which are enterotoxins. You will also notice in this chart that most of these are gram-positive bacteria. The next toxin are the endotoxins. Now, guys, endotoxins are found inside of the bacteria. These are associated with lipid A or LPS that's found in gram-negative organisms. All right, so gram-positive made more exotoxins. Gram-negative make more endotoxins. These are usually less toxic than exotoxins. All the endotoxins produce the same signs and symptoms. So it doesn't matter if the exotoxin came from E. coli or if it came from a different gram-negative, they're going to have the same signs and symptoms. You're going to have chills, fever, and aches. All right, it's going to give you those ones that we say, oh, we just don't feel good. Those types of signs and symptoms. Some of these are associated with causing DIC or septic shock. Those are very severe complications due to trauma a lot of times or certain infections. These are not very antigenic, meaning antibodies are not always provided. So we're not going to be able to harvest those and give them to somebody like we can the toxins on the other. And this means no vaccines are available. Now, what happens here is these toxins are located inside the cell, and when the cell gets destroyed by your immune system, it releases the toxin. Okay, and then the toxin gives you the symptoms of your chills, your fever, and your aches, your body aches. All right, and so it's the toxin being released after the cell is dead. It's almost like the cell's going to get the last laugh. It's like, oh, you killed me, but you're still going to not feel good. Okay, so that's the endotoxins. This particular chart, guys, gives you a comparison of the exotoxins with the endotoxins. So I suggest maybe pausing this and going through them. It talks about how exotoxins are more gram-positive, endotoxins are more gram-negative. The toxicity is high for exotoxins. It's low for endotoxins. We do see at the bottom representative diseases. Exotoxins are things like gas gangrene, tetanus, botulism, diphtheria, and scarlet fever. Whereas endotoxins are going to be things like typhoid fever, urinary tract infections, and meningococcal meningitis. All right, these are not, again, all of them, but these are just some of the examples. So the last thing I want to talk to you about here is when the balance between the host and the microbes is tipped in the favor of the microbe gains a hold of your immune system. That's when infection or disease results. Okay, so that's when you actually get the infection or the disease. Now, learning how these mechanisms work, the idea of portal of entry, penetration, damage, and portals of exit, this can actually allow us to hopefully help treat and prevent the spread of these diseases. It also helps us be able to support your immune system so that you can fight these things better. All right, so it takes a look here. So pathogens must leave the infected patient in order to infect another host. And so because of this, pathogens are often going to leave the affected host through bodily secretions, okay, or excretions. So we see that it's going to come out of bodily fluids. It may come from you sneezing, coughing, urine, sexually transmitted through like semen, things like that, okay? So this just gives you an idea. So the first video we talked about the portal. The first video we talked about the reservoir and the transmission. This is when the body already is infected. How can we support it? Okay, and this is going to lead us ultimately when we get to Unit 4, where we really talk about the immune system and how we can help support it. If you have any questions, please let me know.